This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 622, entitled What Life Will Be Like for Women in a Biconsciousing Culture. Description. This flyer predicts that over the next decade or so, there are going to be millions of bitter, verbally violent, hateful confrontations between monoconscious feminist women and biconscious masculist men, resulting in a lot of pain as millions of monoconscious feminists lose their boyfriends, whom the masculists target, teaching these currently monoconscious male feminist boyfriends masculist ideas, converting them into biconscious masculists, who then see the monoconsciousness of their girlfriends as hypocritical and bigoted, and then dump them. Over time, society will become biconscious, and relations between the sexes will then improve. But the transition period in which women are converted from monoconsciousness to biconsciousness will be verbally bloody, vicious and hateful, as biconscious masculists express their hatred of monoconscious feminists, forcing these women to rot on the shelf, manless, childless, spat at and utterly rejected, causing several million young fluffie women to suicide after being so viciously rejected for being manslaving, divorce-raping vermin. Now the flyer itself. What life will be like for women in a biconsciousing culture, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. The monoconscious biconscious distinction is fundamental to masculists. For those who don't already know, monoconscious means that one has only had one's feminist consciousness raised. That is, one has learned how men oppress women, which is the fundamental lesson of feminism. Biconscious means that one has had both one's feminist consciousness raised and one's masculist consciousness raised. That is, one has learned how women oppress men. That is, one has learned that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and that with one's biconsciousness, one has a basis for comparison to answer the question, quote, which gender is more oppressive than the other? To biconscious masculists, the answer is obvious. That is, that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, since many of women's oppressions of men are horrible and last decades, making them a lot more serious than the relatively minor ways that men oppress women. To masculists, even rape, which is one of the worst ways that men oppress women, is seen as rather small beer in comparison to women's worst three ways of oppressing men, namely women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, and women's forced fathering. Masculists argue that anyone with at least a bachelor's degree level of intelligence should be able to see this just by examining how horrible these three gender crimes against men are that are committed by women against men, which are so serious, so horrible, that it's no surprise that masculists have a real hatred of these gender criminal women and punish them so severely that effectively masculists exterminate such women by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, thus forcing them into a slow, miserable death, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and utterly rejected, both socially and sexually, forcing them to rot on the shelf, seen as pariahs to be spat on. Thus, given the above, the major difference for women living in a biconsciousing culture compared to the previous 6 decades in which feminism has had a monopoly over gender politics is that women will be living in a world in which men have been biconscious. So if a woman is a monoconscious feminist, then the men around her, her boyfriend especially, will be biconscious, so will not tolerate her monoconscious gender political attitudes and be sharply critical of her worldview that gender oppression is a one-way street, that men are the oppressors and women are the oppressed, which is the core message of feminism. Biconscious masculists, including female biconscious feminists, will not tolerate her monoconscious bigotry and see her monoconsciousness as ignorance, as a gender political bias of a strong degree, and will verbally and ideologically attack her, yelling at her, quote, "Learn some masculism, you monoconscious feminazi bigot." That's MFB. We masculists target your currently monoconscious male feminist boyfriends, teaching them masculism so that they become biconscious, learning that gender oppression is a two-way street, that women oppress men too, and in fact worse than vice versa, especially with the major gender crimes that women commit against men, namely manslavery, divorce rape, and forced fathering, which cause masculists to so hate such female gender criminals who commit these horrible gender crimes against men that we effectively exterminate them by forcing them to rot on the shelf, manless, childless, dying a slow, miserable death. We biconscious masculists see you monoconscious feminists as hypocrites because you want equal rights with men in the parliaments but reject equal obligations to FIP up, that's become financially independent persons, by getting career competent educations in high school and college so that you become FIPs as adults and not expect fluffie style to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man for decades of his life, thus man-slaving him for decades, the worst of all gender crimes, as seen by masculists. Masculists are abolitionists, having the same level of hatred against fluffies as abolitionists in the early 1800s in the northern states of the US had for slave owners of Negroes in the southern states of the US. Masculists see manslavery in today's world as 1,000 times greater problem than was Negro slavery, given today's numbers. There were several million Negro slaves in the slave period of the US, and there are several billion man-slaves in the world today. Masculists have a hatred of manslaving, divorce-raping fluffies and aim to exterminate them by being at war with them, haranguing them out of the room with verbally vicious, hateful, masculist rhetoric, forcing fluffies to FIP up or be effectively exterminated. Masculists are predicting that over the next 5 to 10 years, several million young fluffy women will suicide, as they are viciously rejected by young men who will spit at them for being manslaving, divorce-raping, forced fathering, etc. vermin. Young women growing up in a biconsciousing culture will be very conscious that they no longer have the luxury to lash out at men for the ways that men oppress women by expressing publicly monoconscious feminist views, since they will know that if they do, then there will probably be some biconscious masculists in her audience or social circle who will not tolerate her bigoted, hypocritical monoconsciousness and will reject her viciously, hatefully, and if she behaves in the same way with her boyfriend, once he becomes influenced by biconscious masculine ideas, he will become disgusted with her and dump her. Over time, so many millions of monoconscious feminists will have been dumped by their now biconscious boyfriends that alarm bells will be going off everywhere, so that millions of monoconscious feminists will go through a lot of pain as they lose their boyfriends who are targeted by the masculists, who preach masculine ideas to these monoconscious male feminists, converting them into biconscious masculists. If the monoconscious feminists do not convert themselves into biconsciousness quickly, then their boyfriends will soon become their ex-boyfriends. In time, so many women will have become familiar with masculine biconscious ideas that they too will exert moral pressure on monoconscious feminists to convert themselves into biconsciousness. In a biconsciousing culture, women in their millions will be arguing to themselves and to their more conservative female friends and acquaintances that remaining monoconscious is not smart. Since if these heterosexual women want to have a boyfriend, then their monoconsciousness will cause their boyfriends to despise them and then to dump them. These biconscious women will agree with the biconscious masculists that, quote, men don't want relationships with monoconscious, misandrist, male-dumping, feminazi cunts, quote, end quote. So we'll make an effort to learn masculist ideas so that they will not be eliminated off the bat from the dating scene. In a couple of years, nearly all men will have absorbed the message coming from the MGTOWs, that's men going their own way, and especially from the Masculists, that monoconscious feminists are bigots and hypocrites to be rejected and verbally attacked for their horrible, hypocritical gender crimes against men. Over the years, the proportion of women who are biconscious compared to those women who remain monoconscious will reach saturation. That is, virtually all women will have become familiar with the major ideas of the masculists. That is, biconscious masculists. That is, knowing about the horrors of women's oppression of men. For example, the big three gender crimes that women commit against men, mentioned earlier. That is, manslavery, divorce, rape, forced fathering. It will be a real shock in the early years as millions of monoconscious feminists are confronted for the first time by very angry, hateful, biconscious masculists. So millions of monoconscious feminists are going to have their fingers badly burned as they are not just answered back by very angry, hateful, biconscious masculists, but crushed by them. Women have to be careful how verbally angry they dare be against men with their monoconscious feminist beliefs, which cause millions of women to feel hateful towards men for the ways that men oppress women, which is what monoconscious feminism preaches to women. Since feminism has been the monopoly gender politics for the past 6 decades, it's not surprising that millions of monoconscious women are angry and resentful at men, since they have not had their negative feelings towards men taught to them by feminism cancelled by even more negative feelings about women taught to them by masculism. So these monoconscious feminists remain angry and surly at men. Then along come the biconscious masculists, who see these monoconscious feminists as MFBs, to be spat at and verbally, viciously, hatefully attacked. And since men are 3 times stronger across the chest than women on average, men have the luxury that women do not have of being as verbally vicious as they like, since these men will have no fear of being physically attacked by women who become enraged at these attacks by biconscious masculists. If a monoconscious feminist then slaps a biconscious masculist who is confronting her, then the masculist bitch-slapping protocol becomes appropriate. That is, the masculist then slaps her back immediately with equal force to teach her a lesson not ever to slap a man. If she escalates and slaps him back a second time and more strongly, then the masculist bitch slaps her. A bitch slap is a slap across the face of a bitch by a man delivered with full male force. The woman will then be sent hurling to the ground in great pain, teaching her the lesson never to slap a man again for the rest of her life, through fear that she might be bitch-slapped a second time in her life, thus reliving the extreme pain of her first bitch-slap. This masculist bitch-slapping protocol is aimed at teaching women that it is profoundly hypocritical of monoconscious feminists to expect that these women have the right to slap men and not be slapped back. The masculist bitch-slapping protocol will quickly remove that delusion from monoconscious feminists. So for the next few years, during the historical period in which monoconscious feminism is replaced by biconscious feminism, that is, that society becomes biconscious, there will be millions of bitter, verbally vicious, hateful confrontations between monoconscious feminists, MFBs, and biconscious masculists, forcing monoconscious feminism to die out. Most women will convert themselves into becoming biconscious feminists, or they will rot on the shelf, manless and childless, joining the third of middle-aged women today who are manless and childless, who live on antidepressant drugs, living miserable lives with their cats, feeling bitter and ignored, which of course they are. Thus, there will probably be about a decade of historical gender political transition as society converts itself from being monoconscious to becoming biconscious. Once nearly everyone is biconscious, relations between the sexes ought to improve a lot. But the transition period will be verbally bloody, and a lot of monoconscious feminists are going to have their gender political noses bloodied by angry, hateful, biconscious masculists who will not tolerate the hypocrisy and bigotry of misandrist, male-dumping, feminazi cunts and will bite their fucking heads off. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 620 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.